Hi, super friends. Welcome to the rabbit hole that we call SUPERnormal,
where we delve into all the parapop culture topics that you love.
So throw on that aluminum foil hat, get the popcorn ready, and make sure you hit that like, subscribe, and bell notification to let you know when new episodes of SUPERnormal drop.
Sit back, listen with an open mind.
Enjoy the show. Welcome back. You know, I think it's always special to have beautiful people in this space, Dana and Megan. And I think we have somebody here today, our first guest.
We have our first guest, everybody. We have the beautiful Rhonda. And I'm so bad at pronouncing last name. So I'm going to let you say your last name. But we have the beautiful Rhonda, and she's here to talk about shamanism today. So thank you, Rhonda, for being here. How do you say your whole name?
Rhonda McCrimmon.
See, I would have messed that up.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if that helps any with the Scottish accent, but we'll see.
You're Scottish? I thought you were from Jersey this whole time, Dina.
No, babes.
Well, welcome. We love having new people in this space.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here. Yeah.
Where in Scotland are you?
I live in the Angus Glens, which is in the east of Scotland. It's Pictish country, actually, which is great if you're interested in your history.
I've been to Edinburgh, and beyond that, I know where Glasgow is, and I know where Aberdeen is.
I'm between Aberdeen and Edinburgh.
Okay, there we go. Now I have a reference point.
Yeah,
it's beautiful. I love Scotland. It's my most favorite country.
Mine too.
Sorry, other countries.
Enough.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Have you been to the United States?
I have a few times. Yeah, most recently I was there in May teaching in Arizona. I was in was at the Gathering of the Shamans in Sedona, which was lovely. It was very nice. Very hot. Yeah. Unpleasantly so, one might say.
That sounds lovely. Hot. It really does.
That was so nice.
We've been trying to get ourselves over to Sedona, but we would love it if we could do something where we could go to something like that with you if you were to go back again.
Well, yes. I've been invited back next year, so I think it's usually the weekend after your Mother's Day, usually the dates.
Okay.
So that's a decent time to be in Sedona. That's not too hot, because you even said it was too hot for you, but it gets hotter.
Yeah, well, we went to Phoenix for 2 days first, and at 7 a.m. it was hotter than it gets absolutely at the hottest time of year here. It was so hot. I was shocked.
Yeah. No, it's intense, and that's northern Arizona. Sedona is in northern Arizona, where it's much cooler. But yeah, no, it can get hot. So we'd love to have you on, because it's actually, I'd love that you went to Sedona for that shaman retreat or get together, because a lot of we don't know what shamanism is. A lot of us here at SUPERnormal podcast don't know a lot about shamanism, but a lot of our listeners, what we do know about shamanism is either like the North American version of the shamanic tradition or the European version of the shamanic tradition. And you kind of come from the Celtic shamanic tradition. So I don't know if you could just take a moment to tell us, what is shamanism? And then how does that differ from what we in North America are kind of used to?
So shamanism is an earth-based spirituality. It's an animistic way of life. So people who follow a shamanic path believe that everything has a soul and a spirit, an animating spirit. Shamanism and working with shamanism involves guides, shamanic spirit guides, and things like ritual and ceremony, and very much being connected with the land where you live. So I repeat, it's an earth-based spirituality. It's not, and one of my favorite things to talk about is that shamanic practice is a way to bring you into alignment and into connection with the earth and with your human life. It's not a way to escape life. So if you're into shamanism or you're looking for something to escape your day-to-day life, then probably shamanism is not for you. And the difference, I think, just in a nutshell, between what people think shamanism is and what it actually is that people tend to pigeonhole it and think that it's related specifically maybe to Native Americans or Native North Americans, including Canada, potentially South America, depending on how broad your scope is. But actually, animistic practices exist in all inhabited continents across the world. And I like to use the word shamanism because it's well understood in our sphere, perhaps not in your sphere, but in my sphere of animistic practices, shamanism is a word that encompasses everything that an animistic way of life can offer. It's a way to draw people into British shamanism, if you like, because we have a very long lineage. It is a broken lineage. We don't have all of the information. We don't have all of the answers. But if you're someone who really loves the idea of earth-based spirituality, of spirit guides, of Native American practices, but you're worried about cultural appropriation, for example, then you don't need to worry about that. You absolutely have practices that are open and available to you. Wherever you're from in the world, you just have to go looking for it because it exists everywhere. So I started shamanism from a core shamanic perspective, which is like the Western version of shamanism, and then realized over time that I was like, there's like stuff here in the lands where I live. I'm going to start looking into that, and then started to like slowly draw that in to what it is that I do. And I love it. I think that for me, it saved my life in lots and lots and lots of different ways, and it works for lots of people. It won't be for everybody as well, but it is for some. So is that there's a wee nutshell. I could go on.
No, that was good. That was good.
That's great.
So what's like a common misconception? Because I know nothing about shamanism. I think I'm pretty like average when it comes to spirituality. So what's like a common misconception that shamanism isn't, that you get a lot of, where you want to you're like, if I could just like pop that bubble for people, what would that be?
I've said it already, but I'll say it again. This idea that it is only for certain types of people. It isn't. It is an open practice. There are certain ceremonies and certain ways of interacting that are closed, that certain groups will close or will be for them. And that's okay. But the point of a shamanic practice is to be deeply connected to the earth, to be deeply connected to the seasons and cycles, to know how to connect with the spirit, with this world of spirit in whatever way. Like you guys have your way, we have our way. In a way, it's actually all working with the same thing. You just got to find your path, find your own path with it. So one of the things I love to just pop is like, if you are, especially in Canada, where's Canada?
I know her.
I think I'm just like, I'll just smoosh you all together in North America and Canada, especially what I find with my students from America and Canada is that they find Native American practices and feel like they've come home, and they're really drawn to it and they really love it. And they hit this wall of, you're not welcome here, you're white, you're not allowed to practice these ways. Some Native Americans are really happy to share their ways, some are not. That's a whole conversation that doesn't involve me because I'm not from there, but I do see that as a problem. So then what happens is my lovely friends in North America and Canada, for example, will come and find Celtic ways, and they'll often hit the same wall here. So they'll actually you'll find Scottish people and Irish people and Welsh people who are like, you're American, you don't belong here. This is close to you. You can't take this from us. Even
if they have lineage from Ireland or Scotland, they're still like, no, bro, you can't do that.
Yeah, it's very common. It's very common. And I'm like, where are you supposed to go? What are you talking about? Why is that even a thing? Why are we even having this discussion? So if this is you, if you're like, oh yeah, no, I feel like that, don't worry, come to me. We're like super open. There's no lineage in Celtic shamanism. We don't have elders. There's nobody actually who can say this is closed. Nobody, it just doesn't work like that. It's like a dead religion, essentially, that we are learning through books, through archaeology, through ancient manuscripts. We're piecing it together. Like everybody has the same amount of knowledge in Britain. Like the druids. Do you know that term? Druids.
Mm-hmm.
So the druids will set themselves up as like the all knowing oracle of Celtic like spirituality, but actually they have access to the same information I do, and that the pagans do, and that the Wiccas and the witches and the seers and all this comes from the same source material. So if it interests you, dive in, have a look. Be careful, there's a lot of bump, there's a lot of like that. The problem with that is that there's a lot of stuff that isn't ancient, that's just kind of lumped in and added in as well. So if you're a person who wants to get as close to your ancestors as possible, you've got to be kind of careful. But if you're just somebody who loves spirituality and loves to try things and loves to just take on whatever works for you, then bash on. Like that, it really, how I teach is really just about pulling together a framework that supports you in your life, and whatever that looks like is fine by me.
I love
pretty
that.
much. Yeah.
I think that's important. I like how you touched upon the fact that really all of this comes down to the same source, no matter how you end up kind of performing those things, right? Whatever that connection is for you is a personal connection that you have, and how you implement that here on the earth. And I like to say, there's many doors to the spirit world, and just find one that works for you. That's the gift of this place, right? Of having all those different ways to connect through nature, through sometimes religion, through other ways, through meditation. And I think it's important that people know that doorway is open for them. So if that's through shamanism or whatever it is, that it is their God-given right, really, to have that connection. Yeah. And I think that there is a lot of gatekeeping, if we want to use that term. I feel like that's almost an old term on TikTok at this point. From when it started. But I think there's purposes to some I can't talk. I think there are purposes to some gatekeeping for certain practices, like you're saying. But in general, I think people tend to get a little bit, oh no, this is mine and you can't have this, about, things that really are universal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, at the end of the day, I'm like, just don't be an asshole.
Right.
Just like do what you're Matt, you and I are like,
don't be an asshole.
Yeah. Just don't be an asshole. Like, underpinning everything that we do in life, it's like, do your best, don't be an asshole. And like, doing your best means saying sorry when you've made a mistake, and making changes when you realize that something is wrong. And I've done that plenty of times over the 10 years I've been doing this work. There's been times where I've just been using white sage and smudging away quite merrily, la la la, and then I realise actually through education that smudging's not for me, and there's actually a Celtic alternative to that called seining, so I teach that. But I'm like, if you've learned that from a native person who loves to share their practice, and that's a ceremony that you know well, then that's fine. Or if, for example, you love white sage and you find an ethical grower. I used to do a thing where I'd say, don't buy white sage because it's endangered, and all the things that you hear. I've actually had messages from native people who said to me, we grow this ethically and sell it, please stop saying that. And I've had to say, oh, sorry. And now I'll say, I just move more and more and more and more towards this space of like, educate yourself and make your own choices, but maybe spend less time telling other people what to do, and let them make their own choices. So that's what I try and do on my platform. I try and just talk about things and educate, but in a really open-hearted way. So this is what I do. These are my choices. Here are some of the things you can think about. Then make a choice about what you'd like to do.
Love that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of gray area. And I think as we continue to like practice and work, we see that more, right? So I think that's great.
So because you brought it up, what is seining?
Seining is it's a ceremony or a ritual with many different parts. So I also have a podcast, by the way. So if anybody's interested in a bit more of a deep dive, hop over there, find the episode on seining. But it's essentially the basic premise of seining as a symbol, which is to use your thumb and you make a shape, and it's an X shape with your thumb. Doesn't matter what thumb you use, doesn't matter where you start or what direction you go in. And the symbol means to make sacred. So it's based on the idea of animism, where you give permission, or you almost like create opportunity. You know how in the world our intention is what drives everything, right? It somehow just seems to be set up that way. I don't profess to know why, but there's this idea that when you do this, you give the object, person, or place permission to become sacred. So it's like a way to. It's not cleansing. It's the word escapes me. It'll come back to me in a minute. But you can add other elements to a saining ritual with your cross. So you can add smoke, it's very common. Juniper, rowan are two of the most common things that you can burn. And there's lots of practices that have been recorded at various points in the Celtic Wheel of the Year, like Samhain and Bealtaine have saining rituals as part with smoke and fires. You can use water, which is called lustration. So you can use holy wells and holy water. You can use, you can get creative with it. So for me, I'll like, do you want to see my rattle I'll use? It's right here. Lovely.
Ooh, talk to me.
It's
about
one way to sell a podcast. Yeah, so this is my saining rattle, which is a red deer antler, and it might be too loud, but I'll just do it gently. So this is like, it moves the energy in the air. So for example, if you wanted to say in a room, put that down. How I would do that is I would open the window and I would rattle forward towards the window with the intention that you would probably do something similar, right? Mm-hmm. Rattle towards the window, and then you make the saying symbol in your room, you know, just like your room is. It's more about removing negative energy and entities than it is about like smoke cleansing, that's that. But when it comes to saying especially Scottish spirituality, it's much more to do with like negative influence, wherever that comes from, whether it's like the evil eye or like restless spirits and things like that. But yeah, you can get quite creative. Like I say, I did like an hour-long podcast, so I'm trying to like pick out the salient points of like what saining is. But it's it's a really great, simple way to start to pull in some Celtic elements to your existing practice if anyone's interested in doing that.
So Rhonda, I have a question.
Okay.
So like if somebody's really interested in shamanism, right? And maybe they're a little like afraid to kind of go to their first class, like what would you recommend to just kind of like maybe start introducing into their lifestyle, like a daily practice to just kind of like start to get interested in becoming a shaman before calling yourself a shaman? Like what would you recommend?
So there's a whole few questions in there. So
I know I'm bombarded. It's what
wait a minute, I'm just like right. I write down keywords so like I don't forget. ADHD brain. I get popcorn brain. If you're starting out, you're like, oh, I love this idea of shamanism. I want to do shamanism and be, or whatever the term would be. One of the things I'll first teach people how to do is go on a shamanic journey. If you're a witch, it might be called hedge witchery. Like there's different astral projection, there's like different forms of it. But in shamanism, it's called a shamanic journey. And you would go on a shamanic journey to meet a guide. So that's kind of the first thing that you want to be doing, because your guides are the people are the beings who stay with you and support you and keep you safe, which is one of my big things that also teaches around safe practice. Now you can do that on your own. There's plenty of books out there that explain how to do a shamanic journey. I offer lots of free, various free things, and one of them is how to do a journey to meet a guide. And essentially that is using music, drumming or rattling to alter your state of consciousness, move into the spirit realms, meet a guide. Could be an animal, could be a person, could be a tree, could be you don't know what it is, but you know it's there type thing. To be quite open to how you receive your messages. You might not see things. It might be a very visceral and bodily experience. So that's a really good place to start. If you're like, oh, that's a bit spiritual for me, that's a bit too much, then one of the things that you can do is you can actually start to do an omen walk, which is going outside with an intention. So I would like to connect with a shamanic guide. would be your intention, and you go for a walk. Now, going for a walk doesn't have to be in nature, because nature is everywhere. If you're in a city, it works the same as if you're up the mountains of Scotland. Like, that's important to remember. So you go out for a walk and you watch to see what pops up. And this might take a few times. It might take some practice, especially if you're not used to working in this way. But if you meditate or you have kind of some other spiritual connection practice, it probably won't take you too long. And then what might happen is you might see, if you're in nature, actually, you might see an animal, or you might see something that catches your eye and makes you think, or you might see things that remind you of a fox 3 times in a row or something. And then you begin to build an idea of like, oh, this is the essence and the spirit of the guide who is with me and supporting me in my life. So that's another way that you can do it. And that's the first, in my opinion, is a really good first place to start, because your shamanic guides are then the ones that you can build a relationship with, who then support you in your life with what you're doing.
So I have a plan. Megan, you're going to go for a walk. I'm going to FaceTime you. I'm going to set an intention, and then I'll just watch you walk around your backyard. We'll see what happens.
And we'll see. Yeah, we'll see
cool?
what I notice.
Okay, cool. Damn.
Yeah. Okay.
Deal.
Easy.
Matt doesn't like
I
to get
don't
outside
walk.
of his house.
Physical activity
No.
in me, no.
Maybe you'll see spiders. You'll stay.
trying to scare me.
Wait,
I mean,
but
spiders-
with journeying, you
spiders
don't
aren't
have
bad.
to leave your house. You can just...
Yeah, no.
Yeah, no,
Can you do it with meditation, Rhonda? Like, because I know, like, I meditate. I usually sit in like what we call sitting in the power, because I come from more of like a spiritualist side. Can you essentially take a shamanic journey through meditation, or does it have to essentially be like music or anything like that?
No, you can, however you know that you're in the other worlds or whatever you call it, that works. Yeah. I was actually baptized in a spiritualist church. My parents were both spiritual mediums. Yeah.
Oh,
so I
cool.
do have
That's
like
really cool.
background in that. Yeah.
I didn't even know you could get baptized in the spiritualist church. That's
Well,
really interesting to know. Yeah, that's really
yeah.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, since you mentioned that, so you've been around.
Segue.
You've been around that your whole life, then, essentially.
Yeah.
That your parents were both mediums, and so did they work in the church? Did they work the platform at all?
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah,
Okay.
they did.
So, for anyone that doesn't know what that means, it would be like doing a group demonstration in front of the congregation there at the spiritualist church. That's really cool. I think that, you going from that into shamanism, was that just like sort of like a natural transition for you? Because I know you mentioned earlier it kind of saved your life in some way. I'd love to hear more about that.
Would you like some tea? Okay.
Yes, always. Spill the hot tea. Rhonda, thank you.
So,
or Red Bull.
I'm like, right, how do
I don't
I
have
succinctly
accessible.
give you 45 years of right? So my parents were spiritual mediums. I grew up in that culture, but they also bounced a lot from like spiritual thing to spiritual thing. So there was lots of gurus and ashrams for a while, and then there was like, Wayne Dyer and like, the American like guys and stuff, and it was all fine. It was all very like fine, but I'm like 10 and I really couldn't give a fuck. So I'm like, what is happening in my life? I was very confused, and it was very chaotic and unsafe and stuff. So I actually like rebelled at 14 or 15, I can't quite remember, joined the church, just the not the spiritualist church, the normal church, joined the Church of Scotland. Did like, got really into like ADHD hyperfocus, got really into it, like did like the alpha course and like did the whole evangelical fainting, and it was great. I felt part of a crowd, like part of a group. I was like, welcomed by these people, well, for a short amount of time. And then they turned out to be like just people, and it wasn't, I ended up becoming the outcast of that group, and then left there. And then I was about 17 and I found my role. Well, this was in the 90s, like, so I found like all my gay friends and became a really, really devout fag hag for a few years, and that was really fun. Like joined
She gets me.
joined the theatre, like, and they were amazing. I'm still friends with all of those people now, and that was great. So then I was just like, no, I'm done with belief, I'm done with spirituality. Got knocked up really young, had a baby to a horrible man. He threw us out in the middle of the night. I was homeless with no qualifications and no money. So I was like, okay, good. Life is good. What's next? So then I became an accountant. So I did the whole, like, went back to school, worked 2 jobs, 3 jobs, became an accountant and got successful. But I got successful on the surface and was still carried all of the shame and terror and fear of my chaotic. Dad was an alcoholic, mum was the people pleaser, like very dysfunctional, chaotic, moved homes every 5 minutes, all that stuff. So I still carried all of that. Hadn't really had any help with it or anything. And then my dad got cancer and fucking died in like 6 weeks. It was awful. Like, we kept him at home and I didn't know how to hold space at that time. I don't fear death. I never have. The type of environment I grew up in, like, I was actually thinking, do you know what? When I do die, I'll probably be happier than I am here. That, like, death seemed like a good idea sometimes. So that edged into like dangerous territory a little bit from time to time. And then, so my dad dies and I'm watching him die. And I'm like, he had fulfilled none of his dreams despite how hard he tried. He had gotten over none of his demons despite how hard he tried. And I thought, I'm not doing it. I'm just not doing it. So I was a heavy smoker at the time. I used to smoke lots of fags. Rollies. I don't know if you know what rolling tobacco is, but I was a heavy rolling tobacco smoker. And I remember distinctly throwing that in the bin. Never looked at another cigarette. It was easy. It was easy. It was like a pivotal, transformative, fold me inside out moment. And I accidentally stumbled into a shamanic class about 2 months later. Somebody, my kid, who's now 23, but she went to school with somebody and whose mum was a shaman. And I was like, oh, fucking hell. A shaman, okay. Right then, Carol. Whatever you say, that was her name, Carol. Uh-huh. Right, Carol the shaman, okay. Uh-huh. So I went, she was lovely though. So I went to this shamanic class with her, and, you know, can I be cliche? It was actually like coming home. I was like, I can't believe I've just experienced this. Yeah. And then just threw myself into that, worked by that point I was running companies. So I was like running companies and doing shamanic training at the same time, which was kind of weird but fun as well, like bringing that idea of like shamanic connection into a corporate environment for a while. And then as soon as I could, I just gave up that job, and then now this is what I do all the time, full time. So I just can't remember what the question was.
No, it's fine. That's good. Well, it leads me to a question. So did you feel like you had to separate, and like, because when you were an accountant and you were running businesses and you were doing your shamanic journey, did it feel like you were living like 2 lives, or did it feel like you had to keep them separate?
Nah, I was so bullheaded about it. And like, also I have ADHD, so I just overshare. I don't actually have a filter. So even if there are definitely a few people that I wouldn't mention it to, but it was a 3-4 year training that I did. So I had 2 jobs in that time. And I was doing case studies, and I had people in my work like lining up for case studies. I think just because I was genuinely open about it and really excited about it, and people like really were keen to support me. So I didn't do that, thankfully. I think I'd lived a life of being so broken and separated from myself that I knew that I wasn't going to do that anymore. So I was just like, if you didn't like it, I didn't care. So
that's awesome.
That was, yeah.
I think a lot of people, when they have like these dual lives, like they're afraid to share that with what I like to call normies, like normal people, because they're afraid of that judgment, right? Like I've told people that I was a medium before, and they're like, so you're schizophrenic. And I'm like, no.
No, you might be though. You might be Barbara, whatever your name is.
Did you ever worry about like judgment from other people, or like that if they found out that it might have consequence for you?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because I grew up with, I was always the different one. So we moved a lot. So I was always the new girl. I had weird parents. And in the 80s and 90s, the types of stuff that they were in, it was like really not heard of. It was like not normal at all. And I just, like I say, didn't have a filter. So I was really used to it. So by that point, I was like, I don't care. Like if I lose my job, I mean, one of the companies I worked for was a small startup, and I was friends with these people, and it was actually run by a woman, and it was actually quite a really nice company to work for. And the second company, I was the boss. So if you didn't like it, see you later.
You do anything weird, you're fired.
Ta-ta. Meditations every morning. No, I'm only kidding. But no, it genuinely had got to the point in my life where I was like, I'm not doing that anymore. Just not.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And what it actually did was, if anybody's struggling with it, the bit that really surprised me was how open people were. I wasn't going around trying to convert people. So you'll often see that people are like, get a new thing and they're like, you should do it, it's amazing, get a book, like read a thing, change your life. Like, I did it, you should do it. I didn't do any of that. I was just like, this is what I'm doing. And it was like eye language, I'm doing this, that has changed. And people saw the change in me as well. And they were curious. And I think just because I wasn't overbearing about it and just tried to be genuine, it was really nice and quite surprising how people reacted, actually.
Good. Yeah. I'm glad. Because that can be a bit, like Matt said, I've had experiences on both sides. And like, when I hear your story, I feel very, like it feels very similar in certain ways to my story, and like probably all of ours as far as like our difficult upbringings and, difficulty in life. And, I had a child early also. And then, finding my way into a development circle, we all kind of ended up doing the exact same thing, and all of us felt at home when that day came. So again, many doors to the spirit world, many doors available to make that connection. I'm just glad that of course, we all go through these weird traumatic things where, when I say, oh, I'm so glad you went through that, it sounds terrible. And yet also I'm like, your path led you where it led you, right? It taught you so much about your life. And I'm sure that you've gone through a lot of healing since that, right? And kind of dealt with a lot of that inner world issues. But I think that it really, it kind of brings us to this, I don't know, this precipice of like finding out who we are, right? Like really uncovering who we are and like removing some of the stuff we learned that wasn't us. And I think that, first of all, it's brave. So like, I love that you kind of followed that and did it. And I think that there's a lot of people that don't always do that, right? Like when they're inspired to do something or they kind of led to something, sometimes the ideas that they have lead them instead of the spirit trying to lead them somewhere. So I do want to say, like, that's awesome that you did that. But what have you found different in your life since going through all of this? Like, how have you found your life vastly different from before through your shamanic practices?
There's a few really key things that are different. One of the biggest telltale signs of the difference in who I am as a person is that I've got 2 kids. Eve is my oldest and she's 23, and I was a terrible parent. Done a podcast episode with Eve a couple of times on that. We talk about it. I was like such a narcissistic asshole. And it was all through trauma, but I own that. Like, I was terrible. I was so shit. And we've been through this like metamorphosis together of learning how to be different, and it's turned out really well now. And I have another kid called Mirren who's 3. And I'm an entirely different person. And when things do come up, I'm like, there's something coming up here. I wonder what happened to me when I was 2.5 that is making me react this way. And my husband's the same. Like, how can we like reflect and do things differently? My emotional intelligence has done a 180. It's completely different. My ability to be resilient and under pressure has completely changed. I'll tell you what another really big change was as well, when I realised how much of my life was shame-based, like how much of my how many reactions I had on a daily basis that were based in shame. Yeah. That was a huge learning for me. And that, if you're working with the 3 cauldrons method, which is the method in my book and it's the method I teach, then shame is in your lower cauldron, and it's one of the first things that one could look at on a healing path. And I didn't, because I didn't know it was even a thing. So some of the things I've done have been, like, in my opinion, a bit topsy-turvy, but I've managed to pull it all together now into like a pathway. So anybody new to this, go in and look at your shame, because it's like driving your ass usually. So that was a huge change. And then there was a really cool thing that happened. So my family were like, I have a big family, we're all really close. Everybody on the outside is like, oh my God, I'd love to be part of your family. I'd love to be part of your family. And we're just like a big codependent mess, honestly. So over the last like 10 years, that's really started to shift and change. But I was the first in our family to make any real meaningful change, to put up boundaries, to say no, to challenge the status quo. And I did it in a way that, again, was only focused on me. I didn't go into this to change anybody else. And that's a really big piece to this work. It's like, as soon as you start expecting someone else to change, you're fucked. Like, it's just not going to happen. And you're wasting your energy and you're wasting your breath. So if you go like on a healing path with only yourself in mind, what will happen is sometimes, not always, is that the people around you are positively affected by that. So my whole family, from when my dad died, who was the real like stranglehold over our family constellation, it's completely changed, and it's ongoing, because these things are, if anybody's looking for a magic wand, I don't have that. It takes a long time. Sorry, it's really hard. There's no shortcuts. But there are ways to like make real meaningful change and consistently break generational cycles and traumas through this type of work. So that's been a big change in our family. And now everybody does their own work. We're not all into shamanism, but everybody's got their own like flavour of what they're doing. And it's made a huge difference. Yeah.
That's true. All true of what you said of just as far as the importance of, you have to put the focus on yourself and do your own work, and then that sort of shines out to other people, and then it starts having an effect potentially, right? But we can't have an expectation of it. But it can absolutely have a positive effect, and they could start kind of doing their own thing with their own journey with it. So we're kind of all doing our own journey, but together, right? And kind of working off of each other. So it's just so funny because everything that you're saying, I'm just like, that's so similar to what we do, and yet it's a different format or name or way of doing it, but the same.
In my opinion, it is literally all the same stuff.
Yeah,
like all religion, all spiritual connection, where I believe we're all connecting with the same stuff, but you've just got to find a map that works for you.
Exactly.
So that's just, and it's wonderful when you start digging into it and all the like overlaps and stuff, because actually there's a really cool connection between, which you guys I'm sure will know, between Scottish folk magic and seership, of which I'm also, I can see that way. I don't use it in my public life, but it is something I have in my personal life. So I'm a seer. I say I've always been able to do that and see, but like visually, who's ever around or whatever. And that's interestingly was seen as a curse for hundreds of years in Scotland. So if you know this story.
No.
Yeah. No. So in Scotland, if you had second sight, it was considered a curse. It was really not a good thing. There were a couple of like really well-known seers. One was called the Brahan Seer from the Black Isle, and there's some stories of that person. They think that's an amalgamation of different people, but that legend was probably one of the only. But if you had second sight, then you were cursed, and you didn't want second sight. You didn't seek it out. You didn't look for it. It was definitely something not to be worked with. Now, I have opinions about that. I'm going to share them on your podcast. This is the first time. Right, okay, this is the first time I've talked about this in public. So I have this sense, so that in Scotland, mediumship is also a really big thing. And lots of, particularly in working class cultures in Scotland, mediumship is a big thing. And I feel that that's a kind of natural progression of seership from the last few hundred years. Now, everything we know about seership was written down in the last kind of 400 years-ish, 500 years. And the church, by that point, had a stranglehold in Scotland, like a puritanical, like fear-based grip on Scottish culture. And while I'm not one of these who blames Christianity for everything, because there's good and bad in all things, I'm really not like that. And in that period of time, there was a huge cultural stranglehold. And anything native spirituality-wise, like seership, was not, was scary and like the devil, essentially. So I think that if you take it further back, then Seership in Scotland was probably part of like a more ancient spirituality, and then was tainted by the incoming Christian faith and religion. And it's still quite widespread in Scotland today. But again, with mediumship, there's also, I don't know what it's like in America, but it seems in Scotland, in mediumship, there's often a lack of ethical practice and safe practice. I see that a lot in the churches that I used to go to when I was young, and even now it's rare to come across mediumship circles in this country where people actually have any notion of like safe practice, and even when they do, it's like quite thin. So I don't know what it's like for you guys, but I do have some colleagues who are mediums who are like driving forward this conversation around safe practice and ethical practice and how to use our gifts, because the gifts we have are very similar. So how to use the gifts in a way that like connect with what we would have had in the past, which was elders, safe practice for the good of the community, and not just running around seeing things and telling people things and getting messages about people that are none of their business, and like all these awful things that people do and they don't even realise it's an issue. So if that's you guys,
it is us,
find someone who knows.
You've actually
not you guys,
right
no.
spot.
I mean, it's very much
your
us.
listeners.
No. It's very much us out there telling people the ethics are very important and consent and going about this in a proper way. Like that's very much us. If you look at any of our platforms, like that's what we do.
I did. I went and had a look before I said yes to coming on your podcast.
Yeah.
Rhonda,
That's smart. That's a good idea.
I don't know if you know, but you're sitting with the legendary psychic police. Megan, take it back. Take it back.
It's an inside joke, but it's also sort of like a there's a story to it. But basically I just do like a skit of like the psychic police of like people, doing shitty things, basically thinking it's okay. But I try to make it fun and educational. Mm-hmm. So that's what he's referring to. But
nice. Well, I'm glad you do, because I don't have much of a sense of humor about it. I'm actually a bit of a bitch about it, because I'm like,
I go both directions.
Oh,
that's more than that. It depends.
That's me.
Yeah, we're pretty direct sometimes when it's necessary, but I do try to find different ways to educate people, because they're more open to listening when you're not just like blah, 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 right about certain things. If you try to make it more fun and understandable from a place of like a super novice, they're going to be like, oh, okay, I get that, right? Versus the other. But I love that ethics are important to you, because they're important to us as well, because they make a difference. And, because we do have an impact on people, and people need to know the responsibility of the impact that we have with what we do.
And what's interesting as well in the shamanic circle, because there I was talking about mediumship, it's the same in the shamanic circles as well. Mm-hmm. There really is like this like dearth of like grounded practice. It's really interesting to watch. And one of the reasons I think that happens is because we have lost the lineage, because we don't have the elder community holding people accountable and sharing like safe practice, and like it's definitely a human problem and not a shamanic problem or a mediumship problem. You definitely get it in all walks of life. The Christians are bastards for that as well. So it's really genuinely just like whatever walk of life you find yourself in, don't be an asshole. Don't pick up stuff that's got nothing to do with you. Try and be kind, have good boundaries for yourself, etc., etc. There's like some pretty fundamental things you can do. And shamanism, it's called power retrieval, to retrieve that energy, that life force that sits in your lower cauldron. Because the way that we teach it, or I teach it, is that as soon as you lose your ethical grounding, when you are you're focused on external for any reason. Men, it tends to be, or the male energy tends to be speak as God, I know all, and the female energy tends to be I am savior, I will save you, how can I save you? So it's like if you can roll that back and draw your energy back within yourself, because it's really uncomfy, right? I don't even like being in my cell. It's a bit shit sometimes, but it's really like if you can just sit through the discomfort of your own feelings for 90 seconds, usually they pass by. So this is the sort of thing that we teach in the 3 cauldrons, is really about how to, because you say be ethical and don't do X, Y, Z. So what I'll teach is like how you actually like do that, which is also important.
It's hard to face those pieces and parts of ourselves and have that truthful, because I think one of the big things what we face when we talk about the ethical concerns and the safety and things of that nature is sometimes people feel really judged and attacked. And it's sometimes hard to face those truths and what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know sometimes. And that's really hard for people to understand and like listen and hear. You've got to say it in a way where people are going to hear it, right? But it's interesting with that lower cauldron, what you were talking about. So what would be the next step after you've kind of worked with the lower cauldron? Like, what's the next step?
The next step would be your middle cauldron. So your lower cauldron is Cori Goriath, which means the cauldron of warming, which is like the warming place, the incubation place. So it's where the root of yourself lies. It's your safety, your resilience, your nervous system, all that good stuff that you can't think your way out of. And that's where one begins. And then you move up to the middle cauldron, which is Cori Erma, or the cauldron of motion or vocation. And that's this place of like emotional intelligence, boundaries, shadow, the stuff that you can do with your mind. But if you try and start to put boundaries in your life, but you don't have you don't have bodily safety and your nervous system's shot to hell, good luck. That you're not going to keep that up because you're not safe in your body. So that's why we do the lower first and then the middle. And then the high cauldron is Cori Soish, which means the cauldron of wisdom. And you do these in order, right? So once you've worked with your lower cauldron and then your middle cauldron, so you've stopped being an asshole and you've learned how to put up boundaries and you've learned how to love yourself a bit more and you're a bit steadier in your life, then you can start to think about the upper cauldron, which is the spiritual place. So the idea is that you shouldn't be in the spiritual realms unless you've done this like lower work, because it's going to be unsafe and unsteady. So the three cauldrons pathway is actually a way to become much more spiritually steady and effective. So if you're one of these that have spiritual gifts, but you can't sustain it, or it comes and goes, or you don't seem to be able to like sustain a business, or whatever your block is, think about going back down your cauldrons or equivalent to whatever the thing is you use, and starting again a bit lower down and then working your way back up. So that's the idea of like the three cauldrons. And you mentioned ego a minute ago. Sorry.
Oh, no. I was just thinking that makes sense with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you think about like you need safety and stability. And that, like your basic needs, I need food, I need safety, I need this before I can even think about this next thing. And it totally makes sense. But yeah, let's talk about ego.
Oh, now I want to talk about Maslow's hierarchy.
Oh yeah, let's go all over the place.
Stop opening cans of worms, Willie.
What would we do first? So super quick, Maslow's hierarchy of needs works really well, right? It's like a framework, but when you start actually applying it to day-to-day life, it actually doesn't work very well as a linear form. So with the three cauldrons and with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you can be much more in flow with it when you realise it's a circle. It's you don't just do the bottom, do the middle, do the top, and then that's you done. Like life would be pretty easy, and it's just not like that. So doing a little bit of the bottom to get you to a little bit of the middle, to maybe get you to a little bit of the top, and then back down you go, and you just go round and round that way. So it's never too much at once. It doesn't need to be overwhelming. You can just do a teensy bit at a time, and it works well for. You don't have to like have all of your needs and all of the first two tiers before you're allowed to be creative. That doesn't make any sense, because then you'd just be fucking miserable. So like more, it's a circle.
That's
and
really important.
Really
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people, we get this question all the time of like, do I have to be fully healed before I develop my this thing or this thing? And I think I think what you just mentioned is so important, because people need that little carrot, or that like I can get there.
Yeah, it's continual self-development. Just you're implementing it in a different way of like segments with it. But it's a lifelong practice, really, of all of that cycle. Yeah.
And I think that as long as you have a safe practice framework and an ethical framework for whatever it is that you practice, then you can just start slow. But ego is really interesting, right? Because somebody, I think it was you, Megan, that was like, ego, and made the funny. That was quite fun. But one of the things that the ideas I've been working with recently, right, is like the idea that we have this rhetoric in spiritual circles where the ego has to be dissolved or controlled or brought down. And what's really interesting is like a lot of the work we do, especially with certain, often women, but certain types of men as well. Obviously, when we say that, we don't mean all men and all women. It's just like in general, women often tend to need to build their ego up, actually. So I know, I don't know if you guys work with this idea, but I have a lot of female and a few male students who spent their lives trying to dissolve their ego when actually they needed to build it up. Your ego is your sense of self. It's absolutely important in your life. So when you have a good sense of self, a good ego that isn't in charge of the show, that doesn't run things, but feels safe and happy and welcome and loved, doors open. It's quite magical. So I always like to try and throw that in.
Yeah. No, it's good, because I do think that, you know, what I'm bringing up to do with that, I'm bringing up the more negative aspects of when the ego is more controlling and thinks it's in charge. And when we talk about ego in a different way, it's really more about that healing, that understanding, having the positive aspects of the ego be more in charge of self, right? Having that awareness of self, having that love for self, having that ability to accept all parts of self, including the shadows and all of us, and that it's not bad, it's not negative, it just is a part of us, right? And so there's different ways to look at the ego, and it obviously, like how it's phrased or how it's used will depend on that. But it's just, it's something that I know that in these kind of practices, we still, even if there are positive aspects of the ego, we still have to kind of set aside some of that, right? When we actually are connecting or working, to kind of be a little bit more neutral or a little bit more just receptive in general for that time. But like us living people, right? We're spiritual beings all the time. So working on those aspects of the ego is really important for us, just to live a really lovely life that we are happy in, and like feel grounded and get to do our best in this life because of it.
Yeah. In shamanism, I think you're describing what we would call the hollow bone. So it's the idea of like just being able to set aside. I can hear my child in the background. Sorry. To set aside.
That was my cat. It's fine.
Yeah, no, she does sound. She does sound really like a cat when she wails. Yeah, it's about really being able to like shift the human part aside and allow, well, we call it imbas for us now, which is the divine knowledge of the gods, to like come through well, it's always going to be a filter because we're human beings, but not too much of the trauma filter that then twists things and changes things and makes us make weird decisions based on the information we think we've received, but we actually haven't. So we call it the hollow bone. Is that what you're
Yeah. So like I would phrase that as like bringing in the interpretation of that filter versus hollow bone. Love that also. It's great. It's a great option too. But it's the same concept, same idea, just different verbiage. So I like that we're kind of bridging the gap between these worlds of people that may follow us or know us. And we talk about something in one way, having you come on, talk about it in a different way. I love that it's kind of like, oh, there's new ways to talk about this, new ways to understand this.
We're not and I love at the very beginning of all of this is there's so many different roads to Rome, but they're all different doorways to the spirit world. And we might look at things differently, but you said something at the very beginning, Rhonda, of like it felt like coming home. And I think at the very end of the day, like that's really what a proper spiritual practice should feel like. It should feel like you're coming home. And just because somebody else is doing something, it doesn't mean that's the way it's meant to work for you. Because for us, it was mediumship. For you, it was shamanism. And for somebody else that's listening right now, it might be something different. But part of, I think, our spiritual practice and coming into our own is that authenticity, is that joy, because you did speak about that a little bit with the ego of following, like, who am I really? When I peel back all the layers and I peel back what everybody expects me to be or what my parents made me, brought me to this point, who am I really? And at the end of the day, that's who I am. And I don't have to be anything else. And I can just be authentic and vulnerable in this space with spiritual practice. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. I've taken so much away from this talk. This has been absolutely lovely. Rhonda, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Centre for Shamanism, and it's the British spelling. And there are lots of fake accounts. You know, they do that on right. So just look for the one with like, I think I'm sitting about 60,000. So just look for the one that's like got like lots of followers, and that's me. You can find me there, and I also have a free learning portal that you can find. I don't know if you've got like, I think I sent you a link, but I don't know if you sent out a show notes or something, but you can find it on my website, centreforshamanism.com as well. And I just encourage people to start there because I like people to access free teachings. It's one of the values of our company is to make sure that we have accessible teachings for people. There's new things that go in there every week. There's like a learning centre. That's where you can find my podcast. I don't know when this will go out, but we're giving away a drum this month. Like, it's a really fun space. Cool. Like, for that's completely free. So start there, and then if you feel like you enjoy my style of teaching and you feel like it's something you want to take forward, then there are options. We have a membership and other things, but start with the free stuff and see if you like it. That's what I say.
And your podcast name is Shaman Talk, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
That's very cool.
Awesome.
I have one last question.
Okay.
I have one last one. What is your favorite sandwich? I just really want to know.
I
want to bring in a different kind of question outside of the spiritual
do you know
things.
I'm going to be really boring and tell you that I'm not a sandwich fan. Like,
wow.
I have gluten issues, babes.
Okay.
And it's really put me off sandwiches for the time being. But maybe I can tell you like what my favourite food is.
Yeah,
sure, yeah.
I'll do that instead. I'll say it.
Yeah.
And I really like basic food, so I think that something. Oh no, this is so hard. I don't know. I've got like
the hardest question of the interview.
I've got like popcorn brain, so I'm like, oh, avocado. No, that's too boring. Oh, bananas. Oh, who cares? So like, I don't know. I don't know what to say. Do you know what? No, I really enjoy like a really good stew. Like, you know, with like root vegetables and I don't know if you'll keep nodding at this, but I do enjoy a meat stew because I'm great, good. Not everybody does these days.
Yeah.
So I really enjoy like a really good quality stew with potatoes in it.
That sounds really good.
That's what I'd like to eat now, but it's 7:05 at night, so it'll have to be tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, thank you for answering that though, because now I'm hungry. And
you just want a sandwich. It's cool.
Thank you for listening to Sandwich Talk with.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on to SUPERnormal. This has been honestly such a lovely time to chat with you and to get to know you and your story and more about shamanism. And I definitely encourage people to check you out. And, you know, if they're interested in learning shamanism, this is definitely a great avenue to start diving into that. I think that would be really cool. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on. And we look forward to maybe talking to you again sometime.
Yeah, invite me back. This was fun. Thank you guys.
You're welcome back anytime, Rhonda.
Yeah.
You had me at Cauldron. I just want to let you know that. You start at the bottom, you go to the middle, and you go to the top. But repeat that.
You had me at Cauldron.
It's a new dance move. It's a new dance
dipping.
move.
Cauldron dipping. It's a thing.
Ooh,
You should look it up. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Make sure you're following Rhonda wherever Rhonda is available. And make sure you also go listen to her podcast. With that being said, we love you guys very much. And we'll see you later.
Bye guys.
That was really fun, Rhonda. Thanks for being on.
Was it good for you, Rhonda?
Oh, it was so fun. I've never done it with like 3 before. It's only ever been like 1-on-1. So this is like new for me. It's like podcast orgy or something. It's like great. Thanks for my first time.
We blew it calling this SUPERnormal podcast. We could have called it Podcast Orgy.
I know.
Yeah,
but you get creepy and you look in people's eyes.
Different kind of audience, Dana. Different kind of audience, I think, probably.
Different app.
Yeah.